Welcome to the Anime Audiophile Podcast. Please like and subscribe for more. Thank you. Gaara Hiden, a Sandstorm Mirage. Chapter 1. Sunagakure. Shinobi are those who endure. They are those who endure even the most unreasonable circumstances. This was fact. One man held conviction that it was fact. His conviction came from living in a world where you could only survive if you endured. Suna. That was where he had been born, and its scenery was one that he had become intimately familiar with. At noon, the temperatures would soar to over 40 degrees Celsius. And at night, they dropped to below freezing level. It was a world that rejected the existence of living things. An absolute hell where even bacteria were denied the comfort to thrive, let alone plants or animals. That was the world this man lived in. And that was why he had to endure. The man's name was Gaara. In the corner of such a desert, a single oasis clung to existence, the village of Sunagakure. The village's terrain was strangely shaped, sunk into the very earth. Nothing about it seemed like a natural occurrence. Eventually, people began to whisper of the legendary eras of gods like Susanoo and Amaterasu forging the terrain with techniques beyond mortal knowledge. The center of the village held an incredibly plain-looking Kazekage's office. Gaara, like most shinobi, did not have any interest in extravagance. He thought it would be sufficient to wear clothes that most people wore and have furniture that was generally used. It was a manifestation of his abstinence from luxuries. It was also possible that it had something to do with the fact that as a young boy who was the previous Kazekage's son, Gaara had never wanted for anything or lacked any luxury. He had, however, tasted loneliness. Gaara let out a sigh and looked up at the sky. Light from the evening sun fell softly on his hair, a shade that was closer to red than brown, and his face, fair and good-looking, like chiseled marble. He wondered when he would finally be able to use his own will and freely soar away into the sky. Well, right now he had an opponent to do battle with, a mountain of paperwork. Shinobi had all come together to fight the Akatsuki who had wanted to take control of the world. And the Akatsuki had been defeated, along with Otsutsuki Kaguya. However, their battle to save the world had not been commissioned by anyone. Of course, most of the daimyo financed the battle since it was technically linked to the national security of their nations. However, the Land of Wind had kept an ongoing limited arms policy for 10 years now, so they balked at the sudden expenses from the war. After all, it was a battle between you ninja alone. They stubbornly argued. As if that reasoning makes sense. In the first place, isn't the protection we've given you the only reason you're still alive? Sunagakure's shinobi were furious. It wasn't unreasonable of them to be so. They weren't asking for money so they could have luxuries, they weren't asking for gold. Sanitary maternity hospitals for the sake of infants and construction of water wells so no one would be in a difficult situation. Prior investment into research centers so they could keep up with advancing technology. Pensions for shinobi who had been disabled by injuries sustained in battle, and the families who had lost their provider in the war. For all of those things, the people of Sunagakure needed money. And the job to retrieve that money from the daimyo, well, that was currently Gaara's occupation. That job didn't hold any flashy battles of ninjutsu, or adventures with blood spilling down flesh. Rather, it was wrestling with straightforward paperwork, inconspicuously laying the groundwork for future accomplishments, and boring mediation efforts between higher powers. Those were the reasons behind Gaara's single sigh. "Gaara, you here?" The door opened with a clang, and a single young kunoichi entered. She was a beautiful woman, her hair a golden color that reminded you of the desert sand shining under the morning sun. There weren't many people in the village who spoke to Gaara, who was, after all, the Kazekage, in such a friendly, familiar manner. And, out of all the females in the village, only this one woman spoke to him so familiarly. This one woman was Tamari. "What's happened?" Gaara asked, feeling his tense lips relax slightly. When his elder sister came to the office by herself, it usually wasn't because of anything important. If it had something to do with work, his elder brother Kankuro would have accompanied her. Just as he thought. Tamari sat down to speak with him, but there was a wide, relaxed grin spreading across her face. "It's nothing really," she said. "I got another letter from Shikamaru, you see." "I see. He says he's writing everything on paper because he doesn't trust the security of the new electronic mailing system yet," Tamari explained. "It's a pretty odd and outdated method, but still, he does it because he's being careful." Shikamaru was his elder sister's fiancé. He was an incredibly subtle and shrewd shinobi they met during Konoha's Chunin exams. When Tamari told Gaara about her and Shikamaru's relationship, he'd been very surprised. But when Gaara told his brother Kankuro, "Nah, it was really obvious." "Is that how it was?" Gaara had become extremely concerned after that conversation, and even read the love story Ika Ika Paradise to try and understand what signs he missed. But, at the end of the day, he came to the conclusion that those who didn't understand were going to continue to not understand. There are very rapid developments occurring in the encryption system used in electronic mail. The details are in the file sent by the Raikage-no, that's not what I'm talking about. We weren't talking about electronic mail? Oh. Tamari let out a very exaggerated sigh, shrugging her shoulders. "Gaara, I wonder why when it comes to stuff like this, you're just as bad as Konoha's Naruto. Is there something wrong with what I just said?" "There is. There really is." Tamari's Tessen was being pointed towards him. When a woman is talking about stuff like this, she'd prefer it if you listen to what she's saying about the letter's contents. Understand? Is there an emergency of some sort? "No, that's why I'm telling you." Tamari gave a strained smile, and looked like she gave up on explaining in detail. "It's the ceremony, the ceremony. The scheduled date for the ceremony." Ah, the date for the wedding ceremony was, in fact, one of Gaara's unsolved problems, pinned to a corkboard inside his mind. Tamari was the Kazekage's sister and, in a similar vein, her future husband Nara Shikamaru was an authority figure in the village of Konoha. Thus, when it came to the ceremony, politics were immediately involved. The details of the ceremony couldn't be decided only with the intentions of the couple getting married. If an error in judgment was made, over hundreds of shinobi could die. Since ancient times, Konoha and Tsunegakure's relationship has always run very deep. In the very beginning, at the time when the five Kage first came into existence, Tsunegakure could only survive because Konoha had given them a plot of fertile land in a secret agreement between them. After that, one would note that in the southern village of Tsunegakure targeted the far more bountiful plots of land owned by the northern village of Konoha. Even back when Gaara and Tamari had first met Naruto and Shikamaru of Konoha, they had been stuck inside a whirlpool of those schemes and tactics. But, if you put it like that, then it gave the impression that Tsune had always been the unjustified and non-aggressor. However, the shinobi world wasn't that simple a place. The truth was that Konoha's side had carried out countless schemes to destabilize Tsunegakure as well. For many long years, the two villages kept up the appearances of allied nations on the outside, while tension ran thick and fierce underneath. It was precisely because of that long-running history that there was such huge political significance in the fact that Tamari, the previous Kazekage's daughter, was now marrying into Konoha's Nara clan. It was an indication that the two villages didn't intend to have an alliance on paper only, but to have a genuine détente. Gaara said, "It would be nice if Konoha's side said that they'd accept our proposed terms for the date of the ceremony." "You're being unsentimental." Tamari retorted, "How much do you think Shikamaru and I have been racking our brains over this? It would be nice if the security teams in both villages accepted them, too." "You're really not cute at all. Just be honest and say you're feeling jealous," Tamari said, leaning over and pinching Gaara's cheeks. In the past, Gaara would have killed her on the spot for doing such a thing. Now, however, he didn't feel the slightest inclination to do so. Rather, the opposite. Surprisingly enough, he thought that having your cheeks pinched by your older sister didn't feel bad at all. On that note, it still didn't change how Gaara didn't really understand how this relationship of family differed from the relationship between man and woman. All he knew was just this: when Gaara saw Temari smiling so widely it looked like her cheeks would break, or when he glimpsed the wondrous smile his close friend Uzumaki Naruto would send Hyuga Hinata, this thought would enter his mind: something about it is definitely different. Gaara's mother had died soon after giving birth to his Jinchuriki self. His father never remarried. Thinking back on it now, Gaara thought that maybe his father had done that to stay faithful to his mother. Anyway, if the village of Konoha just accepts, all will be well. Gaara said, getting up. Where are you going? The elders asked for a meeting with me about another matter. If I show up before they call me, it'll put them in a good mood. Rugu! A vortex of sand was swirling and churning around, and in the middle of the sandstorm, the shape of a large human was forming. It's huge, Kankuro thought. Even though it was his enemy's work, he couldn't help but be overcome with admiration at the magnificent sight. The morphing body had to be 20 meters tall. The size of a small building. It'd be one thing if it was a summoned spiritual animal who was this big, but it was incredibly rare for a shinobi to be able to transform themselves to such a gigantic size. It's different from the Akimichi clan's multi-size technique, Kankuro thought as he watched. I guess this is something that's only held by a rank Ronin in the bingo book. Kankuro-sama. I'll handle this myself. One of Kankuro's subordinates, Amagi, had leapt out to the field. The enemy hasn't made a move yet, Kankuro barked. It's too early to make an attack. Sir, if we wait, it's just giving the enemy time to gather strength for an attack. Amagi was still young. He had cleared the Chunin exam at 13 and came under Kankuro's direct supervision at 15. He was from a generation who hadn't experienced the battle with Kaguya. Amagi was a young boy with androgynous features, like his cherubic chestnut brown hair, that sometimes had him mistaken for a girl. I'm heading out, Amagi cried, and 20 Kazura flew out of his sleeves towards the enemy. In the same instant, Amagi himself had also thrown several handfuls of daggers. It was a very artistic show of Amagi's skill, but even the Jounin Kankuro would have the ability to create a timing that would let him deflect a barrage of small, sharp weapons in an instant. Yo! The giant moved his arm to brush away the annoying projectiles. But that was what Amagi had been expecting. I've got you, Amagi yelled, and the Kazura he'd thrown suddenly pulled together like silver belts. They changed course in midair, deflecting the giant's arm and heading straight towards his heart instead, rushing forwards like a meteor shower. Ah, so he used chakra strings after all, Kankuro thought. It was a specialty of Tsunegakure shinobi to use the chakra that shinobi had and turn them into strings that could control puppets. Using chakra strings to control Kazura's directions, sort of like a homing device, was an original technique invented by Amagi. But, like I said, he's still young. Roo! The giant roared, gathering all his strength. Amagi noticed something unusual was about to happen and hurriedly moved to retract the Kazura from their course. But he was half a second too late. It was lightning. A bolt of lightning burst out of the giant's body and struck the area where Kankuro and the other shinobi were gathered. Amagi, Kankuro yelled. He and the other shinobi were fine. They'd only lost their footing from the impact of the thunderclap. But Amagi wasn't. He had still been connected to the threads of his Kazura and received the full brunt of the electric shock from the lightning. Amagi crumpled like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Ah, people say that the moment you die, you see bright, revolving lanterns. Amagi had imagined his own death would be under more heroic circumstances, but reality hadn't turned out that way. He'd survived countless battles after his first fight. Who would have ever thought that he'd be brought down by his own jutsu? He certainly hadn't, and it had been his downfall. Am I just going to die like this? The thought threw Amaji into chaos. I still haven't done anything. He could feel his consciousness slipping away, falling into a dark abyss. Hey, somebody said. They were holding him close, keeping a warm arm around Amaji. Oh. For just a moment, Amaji thought the person holding him might be his father or his mother. It wasn't anything to be ashamed of. It was a natural feeling that those in the battlefield would all have. So you're alive, huh? It was Kankuro. There was red kabuki makeup on his face as usual, and his kind eyes were looking down at Amaji. It's basically a magnet release, reaching the technique, Kankuro said to Amaji. He placed the young shinobi under the shelter of a relatively safe boulder. Like the name suggests, you use your electromagnetic powers to absorb the mass around you, expanding your body's scalar appearance and take on the shape of a giant. In a nutshell, it's a jutsu that creates a huge human form out of iron sand. Kankuro knew Amaji had already heard the explanation back at the briefing, but he was explaining it one more time to help Amaji get back to his senses. Shinobi were special people who constantly put themselves out into the battlefield of missions and receive various types of training. No matter how much blood has been spilt, no matter how much they fear death, if they just hear the details of their mission again, they instinctively start to calm down. Kankuro didn't know whether this behavior was a blessing from being human or not. All he knew was that right now, he didn't want the young subordinate in front of his eyes to fearfully die. He'd applied first aid to stop the bleeding too. He does use lightning release for his expansion in size, but when it comes to his electromagnetic power, it's a different matter, Kankuro continued. The giant's walking creates a piezoelectric effect where subterranean graphite is crushed and electrical discharge is created. So, he takes that energy from the natural world surrounding him and uses that instead of being limited by his own reserves. I'm sorry. Amaji mumbled, tightly clinging onto Kankuro's hand. It looked like his mind was still a bit muddled, but Kankuro understood why he was apologizing. Amaji's thoughts were probably along the lines of, I got in the way of the giant I admire. Anyone would have those sorts of thoughts. Especially since this was the first A-rank mission Amaji had ever experienced. Well, I guess the only person who'd remain unshaken after their first A-rank is Gaara. Kankuro's thoughts strayed towards his poker-faced brother. Gaara's first A-rank, in other words, the first mission that pitted him against other shinobi of giant rank, had been when he was 12 years old. The A-rank mission hadn't been long after Konoha's Chunin exams had ended, and along with that, the end of Orochimaru's Konoha crush plot. Honestly, considering how one of the legendary Sannin, as well as several Kekaginkai users had all been involved in the Konoha crush, it had definitely qualified as an A-rank mission all on its own. But, that being said, at the time Kankuro and the others had felt like the words A-rank mission would apply to a mission with certain aspired qualities. Back then, Kankuro had been 14, and his elder sister Temari had been 15. Thinking back on the incident in Konoha now, Kankuro felt terribly nostalgic. That moment, in the middle of fighting, they met a person who was like a son. Uzumaki Naruto. Kankuro-sama, it's coming. One Genin's calling voice pulled Kankuro out of his reminiscing. Okay, we'll be heading out soon, he said to Amaji. This time, let's act according to the plan, alright? Yes. Amaji was cooperative now. Even after thinking he could die in the middle of this dire mission, the child prodigy had managed to regain his strength. The lightning-collecting giant took one huge step towards them, and Kankuro deliberately leapt out into the enemy's path. In a fight between shinobi and shinobi, jumping out and exposing yourself was, 8 or 9 times out of 10, an attempt to lure the enemy towards you and aim at their weak spots. Well, people like Gaara and Uzumaki Naruto were exceptions to the rule, but exceptions were exceptions. In this case, Kankuro was stepping out to lure the giant towards him, and their enemy naturally knew it too. But, the giant still turned towards Kankuro anyway. Every footfall rang out with a great thud. It looked like their enemy felt extremely confident about their Raijinga. This feels familiar, Kankuro thought. He was being reminded of his younger brother Gaara. Sand and electromagnets may look different, but at the end they both used an absolute defense jutsu. They protected their body with an invincible armor, and simultaneously used that armor as a weapon against others. If any difference was to be found, it was how Gaara didn't use his jutsu in such a flashy and gaudy way to turn himself into a towering giant. But then, being the size of a giant had its advantages beyond appearances. He's fast. In the blink of an eye, the giant had already approached Kankuro. People usually expect large things to move slowly. Be it whales or blimps, or monsters like the 10 tails, huge things look like they're moving slowly. But that was just an optical illusion. When a creature's one step covered a large distance, then that creature was fast. It was something that would be easily understood if one thought of a parent and child racing against each other. Large things are fast. Thinking that small beings could nimbly avoid large ones is nothing but a delusion. The giant casually raised its foot over Kankuro. Just the underside of one foot was bigger than the roof of a small house. If one stepped on you, you'd be crushed to bits. Tack, tack, tack. Kankuro managed to leap out of the way 3 times in a row when the giant tried to step on him. But, the 4th time, Kankuro didn't leap away. He leapt up. He leapt up aiming for the giant's own knee, intending to climb all the way up to his face. Any shinobi of Jounin class could quickly jump off scaffolding as meager as leafy branches on trees. The giant's legs were beyond ideal footholds for Kankuro to jump his way up. But, the Raijinga wasn't the giant's only jutsu. Kankuro-sama. Amaji couldn't shout out loud, but his horrified shriek rang out inside his head. The instant Kankuro had touched the surface of the giant's knee, the electromagnetic field that was the driving force behind the giant's movement affected Kankuro too, and the man's entire body literally shattered to bits. The giant laughed. Every single part of his body was a weapon to be used against others. That was his absolute defense, or rather the offensive strategy of his absolute defense. Any person who attacked him would be destroyed to tiny pieces the instant they touched him. The giant had probably never tasted failure in his life. And that was why Kankuro laughed. Kankuro didn't come out immediately. His continued existence had only been partially given away by the sound of his sneering. As for Kankuro, who had shattered to pieces, his remains turned into countless sharp shards and flew back to pierce the giant's body, a sharp whoosh sound piercing out as the sand of the giant's body was disturbed. The place on the ground where Kankuro should have fallen held only his black cloak. It was a rather simple trick. The Kankuro who'd seemingly leaped up to the giant's knee had, in fact, been the puppet that Kankuro carried on his back. He'd swapped places with the puppet at the last minute, diving underground himself as he sent the puppet up to meet the giant. The trick itself was rather simple, but the impeccable timing and exploitation of a human's psychological weak spots were all Kankuro's originality. It wasn't surprising that the inexperienced Amaji had been fooled too. Amaji, and the giant too. The giant couldn't possibly observe the goings-on at his feet with much diligence. It was a weak spot from his eyes being too high up. Do-o-wuff. The giant shrieked as it writhed in pain. From what Amaji could see, the giant was uselessly sending electromagnetic waves through the puppet's threads. Well, that was to be expected. Going by his writhing, the giant was in unbearable pain. He's not just suffering from being attacked by the fragments, Kankuro crowed as he watched the spectacle. There was an extremely delighted look on Kankuro's face. It was the expression a performer would have after successfully pulling off a magic trick in front of a wide audience. He was talking about the giant's chakra pathway system. The cornerstone of ninjutsu was the chakra pathway system that carried living beings' energy, i.e. chakra, through its pathways. Kankuro had unmistakably launched his own chakra-laden strings towards the giant in his attack. He had, in a nutshell, turned the giant into a sort of living puppet. Of course, Kankuro didn't have a jutsu like the Byakugan that had let him perfectly see the chakra pathways of his opponents. But, if you studied the matter diligently enough, then you could easily send your chakra to invade the chakra pathway of your opponent, thus creating a countercurrent of chakra and throwing their jutsu into disarray. Unable to maintain his Reijiga jutsu, the giant fell to his knees. If he was an experienced shinobi, he'd be able to stand back up after a few seconds. Their opponent definitely was an experienced shinobi, but an unfortunate one. The second he fell down, Kankuro sent 3 Chunin flying to dogpile on him, and the giant, or rather, the shinobi who used to be a giant, was instantly captured. Reijinga Kajura, Jounin terrorist from Ishigakure village, you're under arrest, Kankuro said, and not a second later, the runaway Kajura's mouth and hands were covered in shackles. It went without being said that the shackles were there to prevent the criminal from attempting suicide. We're not going to kill him, sir? Amagi asked. He had a vexed expression on his face. He killed all 3 of his own students. And in the process, 10 citizens. Is that so? Kankuro asked. Kankuro was long past the stage where he felt emotionally overwhelmed with that number of deaths. In the war, dozens and hundreds more shinobi had died. Do you want to kill him? He asked Amagi. Yes. All right then, you can kill him, Kankuro said, placing a kunai into Amagi's hand, but you can only kill him if you can guarantee that you'll be able to bring back the genin and citizens that he murdered. How about it? Can you do that? That's, if you can't do it, then after you kill him, you'll be killed as well. Putting aside what this bastard's relations and village will do if you kill him, a dead shinobi doesn't carry the secret techniques people want returned. A dead shinobi is just a pointless chunk of flesh. I don't need a subordinate who creates such pointless things. I won't do it. Amagi said. I see. Amagi had given a good response. If he managed to survive a few more battles, he'd definitely become a good shinobi. Amagi, Kankuro said. When it comes down to it, I want to kill him too. Captain. He's a terrorist for hire, and even if we're only looking at the number of victims we know, he's killed over 100 little girls. Of course nobody wants to let him live. Kankuro was looking down at their captive as he spoke. Kajura's eyes were blindfolded as well, just in case he could use Jujutsu. But if we kill him out of hate, then we're not going to be any different from him. We can't be like this guy. Shinobi are those who endure, Amagi murmured. Exactly, Kankuro said, and gave a broad grin. Alright, let's go home. You guys safely completed an A-rank mission today. It's something to celebrate. I'll treat you guys to a heap of roast lamb. Oh! The young shinobi all let out a delighted cheer. And now I will mention the results of this strategy to capture Kajura that was carried out 3 days ago. Kajura's interrogation has revealed the existence of a larger organization behind him. Our intention is to carry out a mass arrest in a number of days. The matter of Kajura's custody after that event will be discussed between the 5 Kage. Gaara finished reading the long report to the elder counselors lined up in front of him. The leader of Sunagakure village may have been Gaara, but the really powerful influences were the elder shinobi who drew away from the front lines. They were a group of representatives from several tribes who organized the village, and Gaara couldn't make a decision without running it by them first. The weekly meetings they had about reports were in reality occasions for Gaara and the counselors to come to mutual understandings on subjects. One of the elders spoke. As expected of the Kazekage. None of us have anything we're concerned about. As he said that, the line of wrinkled faces nodded in unison. And now that you mention it, Ebizu, the head of the counselors, gave Gaara a broad smile from where he sat in front of Gaara. About time you got there. That's likely what Gaara's friend, Uzumaki Naruto, would have said. He probably would have stuck his tongue out, too. But Gaara couldn't say things like that. He just thought as I expected, and let the slightest of furrows come between his brow. From now on, this is just going to be a friendly chat with some grandpas and grandmas. Ebisu continued, Alright, Kazekage? Yes. Friendly chat my foot. From now on, the counselors were going to discuss the real reason behind the so-called report session. Every incident Gaara had reported until this moment was already long known to the counselors. His informing them was just for show, an empty ceremony. The fact that they were about to ask the Kazekage for a personal favor was just another show of how the counselors were the real power in Sunagakure. It was absolutely ridiculous. Sometimes it would be something about how someone's Genin grandchild was having bad luck in missions, and could he have a word with the Chunin in charge? Or other times it would be about how the sand piling up on the roads makes things difficult, and oh, can't you do us a favor and talk to the daimyo about it? In those cases, they were talking as influential people in the village. Those cases were bearable. It was when they started speaking as shinobi that the situation turned awful. For example, my jutsu desperately needs a cactus that only appears every 1,000 years, but we don't have any. They say there are some medicinal stores in Snow Country that have them, so send some young ones to get them for me, will you? For example, some shinobi from Amagakure have stolen a hidden scroll from us. We don't want to kick up a fuss, so, Kazekage, save our face and handle the situation behind closed doors. For example, say that you're expanding the budget for medical users, and make a special join position for a few poison users from my tribe. Everything the counselors asked of Gaara always had to do with dirty business or irrational personal favors. Gaara used to listen attentively when he'd just become Kazekage, but lately he'd learned how to deflect or ignore their requests. If he just listened to everything they said, then his position as Kazekage, as well as the détente between the 5 great shinobi villages, could both disappear. I wonder what's in store, Gaara thought, filling his navel with chakra. This was no joking matter. Experienced shinobi were capable of loading chakra into their voices and instantly snatching away people's will. There were people who could use the skills of instant hypnosis or paralysis even at simple meeting places like this. For shinobi, the location of any negotiation was no different from another battlefield. Now, Gaara. Yes? You've steadily grown and reached the age of 20, haven't you? Yes, you've quickly advanced, Tajuru said from where he was sitting next to Ebisu, as to be expected from a Jinchuriki child, a genius shinobi who was called Gaara of the Desert. Tajuru let out a grave laugh. Ebisu's health was weakening lately, and Tajuru was being eyed as his successor, the number 2 of Sunagakure's counselors. It had been several years since he'd stopped working as an active shinobi, and as one would expect, his muscles had weakened, and his hair was white and balding. But his power of insight hadn't weakened at all. The man was like a rock. During the Konoha crush, the genius of yours was tattered to shreds and fluttering in the wind, wasn't it? Ah, well, I suppose even monkeys can fall from trees. The end of that matter was embarrassing. In the past, Gaara probably would have killed them on reflection, but his present self had no intentions of doing that. Gaara knew that a person's world was built on spoken exchange like this, and it was precisely because he didn't kill every person he came across that the present world his mother and Naruto loved existed. For that reason, Gaara was even capable of lowering his head in apology. The elders are taking a long time with their introduction. Just what do they want to say? The looks on their faces didn't look like they had complaints about his work. Rather, the atmosphere around the elders was very relaxed. The atmosphere was calm. Most likely, the topic they were going to bring up was something they'd already laid the groundwork for, something nobody disagreed on. 20 is a very good age. I see. And that's why, Gaara, Ebisu shook his head and grinned widely. The smile was like that of a child's. Take a wife. Who, huh? My voice sounds idiotic, Gaara thought to himself. He felt like he'd been attacked from a blind spot. He had a blind spot outside of his consciousness. A person wasn't able to keep watch 360 degrees in every direction, but he'd still be able to tell if, say, a friend was approaching from outside his field of vision, or if a pet cat was playing at his own feet. That was because a person's consciousness was able to reach out to their surroundings and see what was unseen. Shinobi forged and improved that consciousness, using even their intuition, until they were roughly able to sense all their surroundings with all their 6 senses. To still have something you hadn't been able to sense despite that consciousness was due to not being able to so much as imagine what to look out for. If you couldn't even imagine it, you definitely couldn't see it, and you couldn't sense it. It was a blind spot in every meaning of a word. And Gaara had been attacked completely unprepared. If Ebisu had been a Jinjutsu user, Gaara could have died in battle. Cold sweat was running down Gaara's back. An ordinary person would have shuddered, but Gaara was a shinobi through and through. I still haven't trained myself enough. With all due respect, Gaara said, "Why me? You don't know? Is this possibly about my sister Tamari?" "Yes." Ebisu nodded. "Listen well. Our previous Kazekage had 3 children. Tamari, Kankuro, and you, Gaara. You, who carried the power of a Jinchuriki, then became Kazekage. I assume you understand the grave importance of such a bloodline. Yes, most of the world of shinobi was built on heritage. Of course, that didn't mean shinobi were never succeeded by people from another clan who showed talent. For example, the Sarutobi clan, who held such high authority in Konoha village, never had another clan member as Hokage beyond the 3rd. But a large portion of jutsu used by shinobi was inherited, and furthermore, kept inside the clan as a guarantee of preserving their prosperity. And for that, one needed blood relations. Of course, if it's only to preserve the existence of the house name, then even an adopted child or son-in-law would do. But, in the end, if it isn't a blood succession, then the people will not accept it. Sunagakure's roots lie in its tribes. And the tribes value blood ties. Gaara didn't have anything he could use to retort to the elders' words. If he argued carelessly, they'd immediately pounce on him with retorts. He could see that, and that's why he was listening silently. Like an obedient grandchild. Now we come to the main point. Tamari is marrying into Konoha's Nara clan. This is fine. We, too, have deemed it acceptable. However, one of the elders, Ikanago, slammed her fan against her knee. Let's say that in the future, misfortune befell you and Kankuro. Let's say that Tamari and Narashikamaru had a child at the time. In that case, that child would become the only remaining bloodline of the Kazekage. I understand what you're trying to say. Gaara said, in that case, you would feel the need to approach the child and bring them back here to protect the Kazekage bloodline. Isn't that right? What disgusting words I have to force out my mouth. Gaara thought. Even though he himself had been cursed to be used as a tool by his parent, here he was talking about a child his sister hadn't even given birth to yet, and rather than talking about congratulating her, they were talking about using the child as another political tool. The seat of political power might be great and mighty, but it's also a cold and desolate place. But, if that happened, Gaara continued, then the Nara clan would be paternal relations to the Kazekage. Then, naturally, Konoha would become deeply intertwined with Sunagakure's affairs. And this is the outcome that every single one of you elders fear. That's what this is, isn't it? Exactly. But, if I got married first, the tradition of marrying off the eldest to youngest would be disturbed. First, you should look to settle down with my elder brother Kankuro. Gaara said that, but he wasn't particularly looking to push this troublesome matter onto his elder brother. Kankuro had a smooth, glib tongue that Gaara didn't have. The one who was able to hang out with younger shinobi and listen to their troubles was Kankuro, not Gaara. Gaara had wanted to be able to do such things as well, but whenever he tried, things didn't work out well. The other shinobi respected Gaara a great deal and didn't want to bother him by meeting his gaze. Of course you're not Kankuro, Gaara, you're you. I'm not Kankuro either, you know. Naruto had said this sometime in the past, laughing. Like, there are friends who you go out and play with, but there are also friends who stand by you during hard times, the kind you're really grateful for. Gaara, if you ask me which type you are, you're definitely the second type. Those words might have been just part of an everyday conversation for Naruto, but for Gaara, they were like salvation. Above all else, Naruto thought of Gaara as a friend, and the fact that he said those words without any hesitation made him extremely happy. But Kankuro did hold more popularity, and Kankuro did seem like the better option here. Nothing made Gaara think that other than his cool-headed disposition as a shinobi. We thought so as well. However, Kankuro refused. "Oh," Gaara replied after a pause. He had abruptly realized that Kankuro had been the one to push the troublesome matter onto him. No matter how you looked at it, Kankuro was a very flighty person. Even though he had the same good looks as Gaara, Kankuro went to all the trouble of hiding it under makeup and playing around. Kankuro was the kind of man who hated to be tied down to anything. When Gaara and Tachiro had nominated Kankuro to be head of the anti-terror division, they had a very hard time getting him to accept. He said that getting married while the Kazekage didn't have a wife would be a sign of disrespect and that we should get you married off first. His reasoning was logically sound. "Indeed," Gaara muttered. "And that's not all. Several of the daimyo have been saying things to criticize us about how you are still unmarried and without heir. You see, Gaara," Ebizu's yellowed eyes held just the smallest glimmer of kindness in them. "This isn't just all about politics or jinchurikis. We ended up causing you to live an immensely harsh life. We want to give you a family. We want you to be happy. Your happiness would be our tribute to those who have passed." Gaara no longer held any ill feelings towards his deceased father. Those old feelings had been washed away by their second meeting brought about by the Edo Tensei, because he had found out that, even if it was just for a short amount of time, he had been born into this world loved by someone. "So that's how it is, Gaara. Everyone in the village, no, probably even your friends from other villages, as well, everyone wants this for you. Your match has already been picked. She's a nice girl. Indeed she is. They even brought out a photograph." It had already become clear that this wasn't something he could run away from. Kicking and screaming in the face of death was unsightly behavior unsuited for a shinobi. A shinobi had to face death and keep thinking about how he was going to live. "I understand," Gaara said, and bowed his head. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead without him realizing. This was really just another mission, with just a different modus operandi. "I respectfully accept the matter of having a marriage meeting," Gaara said. "I would be pleased if you would pick a date and get into contact with the other side." He put all of his effort into saying those words. End of Chapter 1. Thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe for lots more.